So what would you say, what would you describe as your most valued contribution to the field?
It's interesting. And this is not trying to sell my experience, but I've got a number of awards for research I've done, and the most important research, most deeply satisfying, and I think the most significant for the field, was the monograph publication in Countering Preconceptions of Hypnosis. That took 6 years. I followed that up with something that took 5, and I followed it up with an elaborate program of research called The Factors Affecting Rapport in Hypnosis. That got the award, and I just have to say they missed the boat on the other.
Be specific, Peter. Be specific.
Well, my notion of countering preconceptions of hypnosis I linked with motivation to please, and I think countering preconceptions of hypnosis I was close to saying in my work was almost an essence feature of deep hypnotic involvement. Now, all that is theoretically quite significant in terms of what I was trying to do. The rapport which was picked up was, having done that, why not take and alter different levels of rapport? But that was almost subsidiary to the major program of work that established rapport as important. Now, that wasn't picked up, and it didn't matter, but to me it's the most satisfying program of work I've ever done, and that's what matters.
What was so satisfying about that to you?
Because I know I did it well, and it answered the questions. After 6 years of work, I know what was going on with the psychiatric nurse. That's satisfying.
So later, after this phenomenological phase, it did lead you into the forensic area.
Yeah.
And you were very involved in the false memory stuff from a research point of view, and you wrote quite a lot about hypnosis and criminal investigation. There was a book that you and Kevin McConkie did together.
Yeah.
And how do you look back on that phase of your work?
It's interesting. I mean, so there's been a link with all the phases, and now you're highlighting the forensic, and the common link is actually memory distortion. And if my memory is distorted, that's a phenomenological reality to me, and that's the link. Memory distortion happened to be a very significant social issue in the forensic situation, and that of course brings in the question of the veracity of the memories, and that's not altogether different from my preoccupation with the veracity of imagery and perception. So the veracity of memories in hypnosis in forensic situations had to be a real issue. Forensically, that really is a real issue, and I could not ignore it, and it was important. And that veracity I adopt, and Kevin did too. The hard line position, the veracity is only established by independent corroboration. Now, I think I came from my methodology into looking at memory distortion, and I've linked that with you in terms of the phenomenological reality. But if you land that research within the practical issues of this courtroom setting, immediately you have to ask hard questions about veracity issues, confidence issues, accuracy issues. And what I was always intrigued about there was a very significant article that was published on can you trust verbal reports? And what I've come back to time and time again is no, you can't. And in a sense, can you trust verbal reports? I don't think there's a lot of people at the time out there who weren't a little bit credulous about believing what people were saying. And if you look on verbal reports as descriptions of phenomenological reality and experience, that's what matters. So when someone in the courtroom setting says, look, I'm absolutely certain I saw him with a knife in his hand, I'm far more likely to query that certainty as being a yardstick for accuracy than if I didn't have this sort of approach. And how many people, I think, have been put behind bars because of testimony that was entirely convincing but deadly inaccurate.
Very, very sure and very, very wrong.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you want to comment a little bit about the people who most shaped your perspective? I mean, you've known a lot of the key players in the field of hypnosis over the years. You knew Martin Warren obviously very well. You knew Hilgard. You knew Weizenhofer. You knew a lot of different folks. Were any of these people?
Well, I think they've all had. I don't think there's an answer I can give that says, look, that person stands out. Mm-hmm. Let me answer it by saying a lot of people stand out in different ways. Yeah. Sutcliffe, because I think his distinction between real and fake, launched me, I think, into methodological awareness of those issues. Orne was very creative about searching for the meaning of what happens in hypnosis. And he put me into a program on compulsivity, which launched me into phenomenology of hypnosis. Right. Working with Orne at the time was Ronald Shaw. And I think Ronald had started to develop a phenomenological approach to hypnosis, which gave coherence to what I was seeing, and I then went off and talked about it in another way. Hilgard was always influential in the sense I think he nabbed the tray-like aspects of hypnotic responsiveness, but none of those people were responsible for all that needed to be said about hypnosis, but they were all influential. Now, there were other people. Bowers influenced me greatly in his notion of registration without awareness, and that has actually spawned off to beliefs I have about euthanasia. But in a sense, I think people need to know that when people look as if they're totally lost contact with the reality and are unconscious, and you switch the machine off, I think Bowers is telling us, and I believe him, that in registration without awareness, there could well be some aspects that are being received, are being responded to, and you're not aware that that's the case. Because that raises a really moral issue, is that if someone switches the machine off on me, I'd like to think I'm not registering with awareness, but I'm not certain I am.
David Cheek did similarly with surgery, the ability to hear under chemical anesthesia, the effects of chemical anesthesia.
Now, I think his registration without awareness is a very significant issue. And a lot of people in the field have taken up concepts in their own way. I mean, say, if you look very closely within Hilgard's theorising about dissociation and subdivisions of consciousness, translate that, you might get a translation of aspects of registration without awareness. And part of the problem with psychology, with science, with knowledge entirely, is in a sense, disciplines bring back similar concepts but cloak them in different ways. So 10 years ago I might have read about a concept someone would use, and now it's talked about differently, but it's pretty much the same concept. Quite a few connotations that allows me to do different kind of experimental work, exploring those connotations. But basically, a lot of science cloaks its concepts in new, inventive ways, but isn't radically different decade to decade. That's controversial.